Watch this. I'm looking for a Somalian daycare center close by. Which is the one that's closest to me?
I couldn't find any specific Somali daycare centers near you in Provo. The daycares I found, like Greenhouse Affordable Child Care Center and Sunny Center Daycare, are licensed facilities, but they don't seem to specialize in Somali culture.
Okay, just curious. Well, you're looking good, you who are 3 steps above average. And, well, it's a kind of funny. I try and do this a week in advance. This is a weekly show. Oh, by the way, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter. I'm author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. We are studying Job in the Old Testament this year, so get a jump start on it. Published by Cedar Fort, available everywhere, fine book retailers, and you're looking good, you who are 3 steps above average. I talked about the Somali Daycare Center a couple of weeks ago, and then, my goodness, it's just exploded. However, speaking of explosions, there's some breaking news. Apparently, the U.S. invaded Venezuela, or may have did what we call a surgical strike. And this reminds me of Grenada, October 25th, 1983. I got up, was heading out to middle school, and we were watching the news with the helicopters there, and asked what it meant. My mom said that we might be going to war. Well, that's not quite true. I think this era of stormtroopers and legions of armies invading countries, we're moving to a robot drone war era where we're doing these smaller strikes on people. We're not reliving World War II like sometimes you see in the movies. So what's the motive for this? Well, the drugs, fentanyl, of course, that's a devastating thing. There's a corrupt leader there. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Drugs. Is there a voting machine connection? No comment on that. I don't have any information. Just toss it out there. If you have better information than I do, comment below. Legal authority for this. War Powers Act. So the president has 48 hours to inform Congress about this, although he probably notified the Speaker and President pro tem, and this can go on for 60 days, and then you can get an extension for 30 days from the War Powers Act. That came that came out of the Vietnam War, where you just get bogged down in something where you don't have any clear objectives, and people don't know what's going on, and it helps clarify things for the American people. What's the geopolitics of this? The geopolitical chessboard. Well, you have Venezuela itself. I think Mexico and the drug cartels in Mexico. So Trump did one country, and he's projecting strength. And what about the other countries? Think about the Iran and China connection and the Taiwan connection. If China's going to invade Taiwan, it might be best to wait a couple of years. Yeah, they're Chinese. They can wait. They're great teachers about patience. Whatever you think about China, they can teach you how to be patient, and be grateful for that lesson. The Federalist Papers, Federalist 4, John Jay said this: but the safety of the safety of the people of America against dangers from foreign force depends not only on their forbearing to give just causes of war to other nations, but also on their placing and continuing themselves in such a situation as not to invite hostility or insult. For it needs not be observed that there are pretended as well as just causes for war. So unpacking that statement is you need to have an infinite and indefinite power of war, of self-preservation. Of course, we believe in a just war theory, and it's talked about in the Book of Mormon. But are you doing something that will invite war? Do you have a weak president? The impeachments against Trump. Is that inviting danger? Just a comment on it. So here's some history with the Church. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. March 18th, 2024. Non-Venezuelan missionaries left the country. March 14th, 2024, Venezuela was shifted to part of the Caribbean area. That's kind of interesting, because you'd stick it with South America because it's attached there. Let me pause for a second. I have returned. September 29th, 2022, Elder Anderson and Venezuelan leaders, what they held this church leadership meeting. So Elder Anderson went to Colombia, and had the Venezuelan leaders travel to Colombia because you couldn't go to the country. December 13th, 2022, Elder Renlin went to the border, same thing where he held a leadership meeting with Colombia where you couldn't cross into, but they could cross out and come back in. February 7th, 2020, President Nelson does a virtual meeting with the saints in Venezuela. So we're watching this. You understand the economy went crazy. Venezuela is a very gas-rich country, petroleum, along with the cash crops. But yeah, this certain type of government went in there and it just screwed up the country. Kind of like with you see bad governments can screw up luscious nations. Look at California. So that is the breaking news. The leads, I don't have any information. It's a breaking story. Watch it. Of course, pray for the saints, pray for the temples, pray for the people. That good can come from this. What went this? Marcus Home. Trump's addressing the strike right now. So I'm filming. I can't interrupt it, but Donald Trump's addressing the nation right now as per the War Power Act, plus to inform the citizens since it is our hardware in our lives. So lead story number one, the Somali fraud machine. That Nick Shirley video took off. He's our generation's Woodward and Bernstein. Now it's interesting, I saw from the VERITAS Foundation, remember that's the one that was sort of these, what journalism used to be like back in the days of Walter Cronkite. And apparently they did a video in 2020. It didn't take off, but remember the context where social media shadow banning was very much alive and well at the time. You didn't have free speech. Once you have free speech, this is what happens. Now, remember, why do you censor free speech? To cover up the fraud, this fraud machine, the greasy cogs in this fraud machine. Think about this is also before you had DOGE with in the fraud sleuthing that's going on right now. You have these NGO horse-leeches attaching themselves to the government and just sucking us dry. And that's why you have such a high deficit. And it's a common problem of oversight and accountability. No oversight, no accountability, just tossing money out. Siloed sources. This isn't tracking with CNN. It's interesting because some people are just completely oblivious to this. It's like with Irena Zarutska. That's a siloed story. The left are all about helping Ukrainians, except as Irena Zarutska. That just reminds us that news is a product. It's something you buy and purchase. It's selected. It's not just what happens, but make editorial calls on which stories they show and which stories they don't show. Case in point, Minnesota. Now, you have these two stories in Minnesota. One is George Floyd. That just ignited the country. BYU had their REB. Now, it's interesting. They called it the race equity and belonging. They didn't call it DEI, which is very good persuasion on their part because of the baggage, but it's the same thing. They came up with their 26 points. I think it was interesting that at no point did anyone say, hey, first of all, why is this racism going on at the university? And secondly, is racism a sin? Say, look, if you're a racist, you need to confess this to your bishop. And if you're the bishop or stake president, man. So Minnesota, you have these George Floyd's death that shaped our conference discussion. President Nelson was involved with it. But, there's just a lot of silence on this fraud because people on the left were about big government. So this is the reason why you're for big government, is that you attach your horse leech to the government and you just start sucking money out. And that's what it's really about. Money laundering and fraud. But the story is just completely obliterated. So in the headline, I mentioned the Romney connection to this. Now, you remember back in New York Times, December 19th, 2025, that was a long time ago last year, that Mitt Romney posted this editorial, said, well, yeah, you need to tax the rich, which is a funny statement. I know he did work for Bain, and so he understands money, but the rich are already taxed at 50%. So Romney is already taxed at 50%, and even with good lawyers and good tax shelters, you're still paying through the nose if you're rich. So they're already getting taxed. He doesn't mention that they're already being taxed, and so just tax them some more. That's why the Beatles wrote the song "The Taxman." Just go play the Beatles song "Taxman." What was happening? These were, lower class poor people. They're suddenly rich and realize how much money the government's sucking up. The second thing is once you raise taxes, markets adjust. Markets always adjust. But thinking of his statement in terms of the Somali fraud, if we're running these massive deficits and national debts, deficit spending and national debt, is the problem we're not taxing people enough? Has any nation ever taxed itself into prosperity? Or do we need to get the fraud under control first? Start, holding that big lighter underneath the horse leeches and pulling them off of government. This wholesale fire sale NGO fraud. And remember, this is not just in Minnesota. This is everywhere, all across the country. All these small NGOs, these other organizations, just taking government money without any accountability or oversight, and that's why the deficit and the debt are so large. Mitt Romney didn't discuss this fraud, and that's a very egregious oversight on his part. So, as the Book of Mormon teaches, we cleanse the inner vessel first. Cleanse the inner vessel, and before you start doing the taxaholic and kleptomania solution. Because you think what happened is once you stop the fraud, how much money will we have? And that's just not on the radar. It's always the solution's always taxes, and never getting the horse leech problem with the federal government. Now, there's another. This is a sensitive issue. You remember about 10 years ago, March 2016, you had the I Was a Stranger initiative. And I don't know if this reality is a complex system, but at the time, Trump was saying, hey, we need to start vetting people from Muslim countries. And about that time is where you had the I Was a Stranger came out. And you have the refugee issues in Europe and other areas, displaced people. This is started with a lot with the women's organizations. You remember at the time, President Uchtdorf would come out and said, with his blue eyes and succulent accent, I was a refugee. This is the trauma I had, and that resonated with people. You also had Patrick Kieran, who was in the European area presidency, with his seductive accent, talking about, this will define us. So, is the church a contributing factor to the Somali fraud machine? By just saying, okay, we're going to be very naive about immigrants. They're all good actors, innocent bystanders. There's no evil with these immigrants. And just bring them to the country and take care of them. This is what my take is. Trump was 100% right about vetting. What's our vetting process? Are we being very naive about people, that they're just not all, we have this doctrine about the fall of man, carnal, sensual, and devilish, but we just completely forget it when you deal with the immigrant situation. This mind blank about what the Book of Mormon teaches about human nature, and the church is still under condemnation because we're not taking the Book of Mormon seriously. So what's the oversight and accountability with immigrants? That's a fair question. And here's another thing. If people claim asylum, do they ever return back to their country on vacation? Think about that. If someone says, okay, I'm claiming political asylum, but did they ever go back to their country after get all this money from the government? Do a vacation back home? Does that feel right if that's going on? So I'm not sure who to trust or what to trust, because I know people have a vested interest in, if not out, faking, fudging, and massaging numbers, subtly tweaking them. And that's human nature again. But back to the question, so is the church at fault for the Somali fraud? My answer is no. This is a global initiative. We're dealing with a bunch of different countries. The Somali fraud is just one small greasy cog in this NGO machine that's siphoning off money. So, no, I wouldn't hold the church accountable. Like I said, just raise a question. We do have a vetting process for baptism and vetting processes for going to the temple, the temple recommend interview, and can we apply the same temple recommend interview vetting process and baptismal interview process to immigrants, so there's no double standards there? That feels like a right thing to do. Let me pause a minute. We're at 14 minutes. Yeah, the Somali story is part of a bigger issue. We need to develop NGO sleuths, fraud sleuth, people who can sniff things out. Fraud hound dogs can sit there and say, "Hey, there's fraud going on there. We need to put a stop to it," and come up with what's the response when someone calls you racist for pointing out that Somalians are committing fraud against the American people, against you. The reason why your tax return isn't as big as you'd like is because this fraud's going on. Lead story number 2. This comes from 1901 from President Lorenzo Snow. In January 1901, President Lorenzo Snow, president of the church at the time, released this statement, and it's called "Greeting to the World" from Lorenzo Snow, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, something to notice is, first of all, 1901, they understand that 1901 is the turn of the century, not 1900. Something happened. I'd say 1968, with the release of the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, Arthur C. Clarke understood that 2001 is the first year of the new century and the new millennium. But something happened. We got this odometer effect with 2000, the round number effect, and that's what you had with the Living Christ. We released the Living Christ about a year early, but not sure what it is. You see it in Back to the Future with December 25th, the year 000, which is wrong. But something happened with the odometer effect that was lost. So President Lorenzo Snow released a statement. I'm going to read it in its entirety. Certainly it's not a slow news day, but I think it bears repeating. We're losing touch with our history, with this madcap rush to get people of other faiths to like us. It's a problem. We're losing our sense of history, our equilibrium. Speaking of which, some things to think about. Back in October of 2024, Elder Gary Stevenson made this comment in General Conference, and he said, let me explain. Between now, 2024, and 2034, we'll experience seminal events that will result in extraordinary opportunities to serve, to unite with members and friends, and to introduce the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to more people than before. One of the things he mentioned was President Nelson's 100th birthday. That got a lot of traction. He wrote an op-ed. Yeah, that's good. People are paying attention. He was the oldest religious leader for a time, older than the Pope, and he had some pretty good genes. The Smith family lived for a long time, but President Nelson was 101. That's anyone who's over 101. You just drop what you're doing and listen to what they have to say. That's fun to listen to. What happened is the rededication of the Salt Lake Temple. At some point, it's going to happen. The year 2030 will be the bicentennial of the church. 2024, they get the Winter Olympics again. Now, one thing he missed was the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. There's another statement by President Joseph F. Smith, of the first presidency, and it's called An Address to the World. It's 1907 Address to the World, where President Joseph F. Smith, in the first presidency, talk about the relationship church in America. As a missionary in Portugal, you're always very cautious about making sure you weren't exporting, Americanism, Utahism, Wasatch Frontism, or in my case, Californiaism, to these other countries. Make sure we're preaching the gospel, not the inclination. For example, Thanksgiving. That's an American holiday. They do it up in Canada a month earlier around Columbus Day, but I think that's American. Now, being thankful, that's a good thing, but the celebration with turkey, that's an American holiday. So let me read this, and I'm reading the version that was published in the Millennial Star, but I provided a link a link to another pamphlet at the Church History Library. So this is the Millennial Star, and this is it. And like I said, it's 1901. So and as I read this, think about our context, the bicentennial of the country, or the semi-quincentennial, 250 of America, 200th of the church, 200th of the first vision. So what he says, "Greeting to the world from Lorenzo Snow." Not greetings, but greeting. Pay attention to that language stuff. President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Salt Lake City. A new century dawns upon the world today. The 100 years just completed were the most momentous in the history of man upon this planet. It would be impossible in 100 days to make even a brief summary of the notable events, the marvelous developments, the grand achievements, and the beneficial inventions and discovery which mark the progress of the 10 decades now left behind in the ceaseless march of humanity. The very mention of the 19th century suggests advancement, improvement, liberty, and light. Happy are we to have lived amidst its wonders and shared in the richest of the treasures of intelligence. Think about this as you're studying the gospel on your phone. How you can go back and read all these. You just have too much gospel information out there to the point where you're drowning in it. The lessons of the past century should have prepared us for the duties and glories of the opening year. And that applies to each. What did you learn last year? Each year you're learning stuff. Are you learning, or are you just like a revolving door going around in circles? It ought to be the age of peace, of greater progress, of the universal adoption of the golden rule. The barbarism of the past should be buried. War with its horrors should be but a memory. I'm saying this as we're have this military action against Venezuela. The aim of nations should be fraternity and mutual greatness. The welfare of humanity should be studied instead of the enrichment of a race or the extension of an empire. And that's just not white racism. There's other forms of racism out there. Awake, ye monarchs of the earth and rulers among nations, and gaze upon the scene on which the early rays of the rising millennial day gild the morn of the 20th century. The power is in your hands to pave the way for the coming of the King of Kings, whose dominion will be over all the earth. Disband your armies. Disband your armies. Turn your weapons of strife into implements of industry. Take the yoke from the necks. Take the yoke of the people. Arbitrate your disputes. Meet in royal congress and plan for union instead of conquest. For the banishment of poverty, for the uplifting of the masses, and for the health, wealth, enlightenment, and happiness of all tribes and peoples and nations. Then shall the 20th century be to you the glory of your lives, the luster of your crowns, and posterity shall sing your praises, while the Eternal One shall place you on high among the mighty. Think about that. 20th century, we had two very large wars, two global conflagrations, Vietnam, Korea, the Cold War. What would have happened if we followed the prophet? Ye toiling millions who in the sweat of your face earn your daily bread, look up and greet the power from above, which shall lift you from bondage. The day of your redemption draweth nigh. Cease to waste your wages in that which keeps you in want. And think about that. He's pointing out, poor people sometimes spend money foolishly, and that's why you're poor. Regard not the wealth as your enemy, and your employers as your oppressors. Seek for the union of capital and labor. Be provident when in prosperity. Do not become a prey to designing men who seek to stir up strife for their own selfish ends. Is that class warfare that you hear from some people? Strive for your rights by lawful means and desist from violence and destruction. Anarchism and lawlessness are your deadly foes. The reason why they're foes is because they collapse the system. You work within the system. Is the system corrupt? All systems are corrupt because we're all imperfect people, but some are more efficient than others. Dissipation and vice are chains that bind you to slavery. Freedom is coming for you. Its light approaches as the century dawns. That's an interesting problem. That happened. My minored in political science, and we discussed the third wave of democratization. The second one happened after World War II, and the third one happened in the 1970s with started with the liberation of Portugal's colonies in Africa, and then ended up with the liberation of the Soviet Union. It's because when he wrote this, Russia hadn't gone communist yet when he wrote this, so it was something that happened in between. But so that prophecy came true. Men and women of wealth, use your riches to give employment to the laborer. So instead of taxing people, like Mitt Romney says, what does Lorenzo say? Take the idle from the crowded centers of population and place them on the untilled areas that await the land of industry. Unlock your vaults, unloose your purses, and embark in enterprises that will give work to the unemployed. So he says expand business, not tax, but expand business. Taxes slow down business. They create friction. So I'm sorry, Mitt Romney, Lorenzo Snow, or Mitt Romney. Let's see. They'll give work to the unemployed and relieve the wretchedness that leads to the vice and crime which curse your great cities and that poison the moral atmosphere around you. Make others happy and you'll be happy yourselves. As a servant of God, I bear witness to the revelation of his will in the 19th century. It came by his own voice from heavens, by the personal manifestation of his Son, and by the ministration of holy angels. He commands all people everywhere to repent, to turn from their evil ways and unrighteous desires, to be baptized for the remission of their sins, that they may receive the Holy Ghost, and come into communion with him. He has commenced the work of redemption spoken of by all the holy prophets, sages, and seers of all ages and all races of mankind. He will assuredly accomplish his work, and the 20th century will mark its advancement towards greater consummation. Every unfoldment of the 19th century in science, art, and mechanism, and music and literature, and poetic fancy and philosophical thought was prompted by his Spirit, which before long will be poured out on all flesh that will receive it. He is the Father of us all, and he desires to save and exalt us all. So once again, early on, this statement is used, I think, in that first presidency statement, 1907, about the spirit of invention. How 200 years ago, we're just kind of living like Napoleon, like Romans, but all of a sudden you just had all this technological eruption. It's just in my lifetime, it's just amazing. And he's talking about that. That gets inspired by God. In the 87th year of my age on earth, and this is like President Nelson's 100th year, where he's talking about, okay, I'm getting old and this is what I see. In the 87th year of my age on earth, I feel full of earnest desire for the benefit of humanity. I wish all a happy new year. I hope to look for the grand events to occur in the 20th century. At this auspicious dawn, I lift up my hands and invoke the blessing of heaven upon the inhabitants of the earth. May the sunshine from above smile upon you. May the treasures of the ground and the fruits of the soil be brought forth freely for your good. May the light of truth chase darkness from your souls. That's section 93. May the righteousness increase and iniquity diminish as the years of the century roll on. May justice triumph and corruption be stamped out. And may virtue, chastity, and honor prevail until evil shall be overcome and the earth shall be cleansed from wickedness. Lift these sentiments as the voice of the, quote, Mormons, and that's back when we thought it was okay to disobey God and use the incorrect name of the church. In the mountains of Utah, go forth to the whole world and let all people know that our wish and our mission are for the blessing and salvation of the entire human race. May the 20th century prove the happiest as it will be the grandest of all the ages of time. May God be glorified in the victory that's coming over the sin, sorrow, and misery of death. Peace be unto you all. So that's an interesting document. As history bear witnesses, we completely ignored it, as always, and had these two great wars during that time. But what would have happened if we had followed this? And the thing is relevant now. I pointed out, he said, he never said, okay, the solution is to tax rich people who are already being taxed at 50%. And it's create jobs, job creation. But you notice what's missing out? The AI revolution that's going on right now, social media and AI revolution. That's why you need to have living prophets. So pray for Dallin H. Oaks as he selects the the new apostle to fill the vacancy caused by Elder Holland's death, President Holland. Just about President Holland, I've intersected with him over time, just as being a BYU student and living in Utah. First, he's the one who let me into BYU, although by the time I got there, Rex E. Lee was president. Shook his hand once at the Assembly Hall. Met him at the Mazer building. He was giving a talk about his book, Christ in the New Covenant, the one that Dallin H. Oaks talked about. And that was a fun experience. A lot of comment about his blue eyes. So he's as best I could tell, he's an authentic person. But you got what you saw. I mean, I don't know. Everyone's imperfect, but yeah, he will be missed. So we're at half an hour news blips. I can't cover every news story. Just right now, there's a developing story which I can't cover. So news blips. Mamdani and no bathrooms. I keep calling him Mamdani instead of Mamdani. But there are no bathrooms as an inaugural address on New Year's Eve. But pay attention to what he said. Now, I've studied some neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectic linguistic programming. These are quasi-pseudoscience, but there's some truth to them. This is what he said. This is his quote. It said, Mom, Donnie, we will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. Now, he's saying that New Year's Eve in New York. That is a statement you can feel. You can feel the frigidity. You're sitting there, you're shivering, and you need to go to the bathroom. This guy couldn't provide you with toilets, so you're peeing in the gutter. But the frigidity with the warmth of collectivism. Now, think about what I just read with what President Lorenzo Snow said the solution was. But that's very effective persuasion, because you could feel that to the marrow of your bones when you're standing there very cold. The frigidity of, well, this guy is slick. This guy's as slick as Bill Clinton. Remember what the Book of Mormon says about fair promises and flattering speeches. Sorry, my tablet's acting up a bit. Primary sabotage. There's a niqab-wearing Muslim woman who has voted Democrat since at least 2008, is the only, quote, Republican running for North Carolina Senate. So I wear ceremonial clothing, but with niqab or hijab, or with any type of head covering, how do you know the person is who they say they are if you can't look at their face? Facial recognition technology. Well, there's such thing as gait recognition, but that's how people walk. That just raises the question. So I'm not telling that because I don't want to ban on my religious clothing. Not surprising news. Megan McArdle, she, I think it was with the New York Post, but they had it published in the Deseret News. She said, the diversity of overcorrection in the workplace, and this is the poll quote, discrimination against young white men was an open secret in hiring. And she concludes the essay with this, but it's also true that as a group, young white men weren't competing on an even playing field with the rest of us. They were forced to play a much harder game that offered many fewer prizes. It's one thing to ask them nicely to do this as an unfortunate necessity, sacrifice for the greater good. It's quite another thing to make fun of them because they failed to win a contest that was rigged against them. And if you choose the latter course, don't be surprised if they curse out the referees or decline to keep playing by your rules. Now, keep that in point with BYU Law School, how they're having a majority of female applicants. So if I were to apply for, like I have a degree in history, minor political science. If I were to go to apply to BYU Law School, would I get a fair hear, or would they tweak things to get the bragging rights? As an alumnus of BYU, I have every right to make that comment. Let's see, life some pointers. You remember? That I have this big pointer. This is full of medical bills, etc. This is for tax documents. So I put them in here, but I haven't paid taxes yet. So what you do is you get a blank folder for the next year. You start putting stuff in here. Oh, look, there's already something in here. I got something about my insurance card. So this is 2025, I have it handy to pay taxes. This is 2026, and I just rotate the folders. Remember how God organizes things. Being a crazy maker is not an attribute of godliness. So we're at, that's life some pointers, so I gotta set that aside too. So eChapel, make sure you're bearing testimony online. So 33 minutes, that's the passing scene. Seen with the eyes of faith. Thank you.